Yo, what's good? Welcome to the Fantasy Football Prodigy Podcast. My name is Tyler Anderson, and in this episode, we are going to be going over my Week 4 starts of the week for the 2024 fantasy football season. We're also going to review that interesting Thursday night football game between the Dallas Cowboys and the New York Giants. I'm recording this on September 27th, 2024. It is later at night, so by the time this is posted, it'll probably be the 28th or later that you are hearing this, but yes, it is Friday the 27th. So obviously I'm going to give you my starts of the week as news breaks over the weekend, make adjustments, if injuries happen or stuff like that. Obviously if one of my wide receivers starts of the week loses their quarterback to a pregame injury or something, that's going to affect them. But before we do get into the starts of the week and the Thursday night football recap, please make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you are enjoying the podcast so that you can become a fantasy football prodigy. Want to stay tuned for all the episodes to get all the goodness. So before we get into the starts of the week, Dallas Cowboys traveled to New York to take on the Giants. So the Giants were, the Cowboys were 5.5 point road favorites, and they ended up winning 20-15, and there was a missed field goal at the end of the game. So as the announcer said, there were a lot of people invested in that field goal, and there definitely were, but the game was pretty gross, and there were a ton of penalties called, and it just really was not an exciting game. But the Cowboys haven't looked great, and the Giants have looked a little better than they did in week 1 where they got demolished. So I'm not surprised that this game was a one-score game, honestly. The Cowboys have owned the Giants over the last few years, but they're not really playing well, even though they did get the win. So I guess they are now 2-2. The Giants are now 1-3. Dak Prescott had an okay game for fantasy. He was 22 of 27, 221 yards, and 2 touchdowns. A lot of 2s in there. He also added, 2 carries for -1 yard. So didn't run. And then in the backfield, interesting to note is Rico Dowdle. It seemed like there was a shift where he was kind of becoming the leader of that backfield, and that does seem to be the case here. Rico Dowdle was on the field for 45% of the offensive snaps, 25 snaps total. So 45% for him. And then Ezekiel Elliott, let me pull up his number quick here. He was on the field for only 18% of snaps, 10 snaps total. So I traded for him in Dynasty just because there was a rebuilding team that was selling Zeke on the cheap. And even that deal just seems like I shouldn't have taken it, because I thought maybe Zeke would be at least in somewhat of a timeshare and be useful for fantasy here. But Rico Dowdle finished 11 for 46 on the ground. He also saw 1 for 15 through the air, and it did go for a touchdown. There was a flag on that play, but they did pick it up, so the touchdown did count. So Rico Dowdle looks like the guy to have in the Dallas backfield. Also, I did drop Rico Dowdle in Dynasty last offseason, kind of like shortly after the season ended. So that makes sense that he's going off, because everyone that I drop in the Dynasty League, every backup running back, they end up becoming a starter. Jordan Mason, Raheem Mostert, now Rico Dowdle. I think there's more too, but Zeke was 5 for 19 on the ground. He also had 1 for 5 through the air. So the backfield's a little messy. If this offense gets things clicking, then, scoring more points, then okay, we'll be more interested. But Rico is going to be relevant for fantasy, it looks like. In the passing game, CeeDee Lamb was 7 for 98 and a touchdown. You love to see that. You drafted him to be a superstar receiver, so nearly 100 yards and a touchdown is great. He also added 3 carries for 8 yards. And then Jake Ferguson, my guy at tight end, he had a really good week in his return last week, and he had another one this week. 7 for 49. Not a lot of yardage, but the receptions were there, which is great to see. And what were his targets? Let's see. Jake Ferguson saw 7 targets, and he caught all of them. Okay. I was looking at a box score that didn't have all those details, but I found a better one. Okay. And then, outside of that, outside of CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson, Dak, and then maybe Rico, those are really the only guys on this team that you need to be concerned about for fantasy. Jalen Tolbert, maybe in a dynasty league. He was somewhat involved. He was 3 for 24 on 3 targets, Brandon Cooks saw 4 targets in this game, but only turned into 1 for 16. It seems like he might be a little bit cooked at this point in his career. So yeah, those are all the players of note. And then on the Giant side of the football, not a great game for fantasy for Danny Dimes, Daniel Jones. He was 29 of 40 for 281 yards and 1 pick. Devin Singletary, I thought this was a good spot for him. If you, I did a little preview of this week, and the Cowboys' run defense had been really poor, but they shut down the run in this game. Devin Singletary was 14 for 24 yards on the ground. Just couldn't really get anything going. He added 1 for 14 in the passing game, which I guess is, better than nothing. And what else? The superstar, we're going to call him at this point, rookie wide receiver, Malik Neighbors. I mean, holy cannoli. This guy is being utilized at an absurd rate. He's having a historically good start to his rookie season here. 15 targets in this one, turned into 12 for 115 yards. No touchdown, but still crazy yardage, and he is a beast, and he's going to see a ton of targets each and every week. Speaking of a ton of targets, Wan'Dale Robinson also had 14 targets in this game, turned into 11 for 71. So, like I said in the preview, like he could be a good PPR play. He doesn't really do a lot with his catches, but he is seeing a lot of targets some weeks. It's going to be hard to predict, but he's done this throughout his career where he'll have his weeks where he's a little bit involved. Darius Slayton saw 5 targets, turned into 3 for 56. Those are kind of the main receiving lines there. So yeah, the Cowboys did get that win 20-15. And we're going to move past that game because that was a really gross game. So we're going to get into my starts of the week now. Before we do that, remember to follow or subscribe wherever you are enjoying the podcast. If you do want video and you want to see my really attractive face, just head over to the Fantasy Football Prodigy YouTube channel and you can see what I got going on over here. It ain't much, but it's honest work. We're going to start with the quarterback position. My first quarterback start of the week, CJ Stroud of the Houston Texans at home versus the Jacksonville Jags. Jacksonville gives up the second most points per game to the quarterback position, and they just got absolutely destroyed by Josh Allen and the Bills in the passing game last week. CJ Stroud, where you had to draft him at his ADP, hasn't quite paid off at this point, but he is in a great spot to have a big blow-up game here, and I think this is going to be a week where you're really happy that you have Stroud on the roster. He is a mid-quarterback one with upside in this game. My next quarterback start of the week is Kyler Murray of the Arizona Cardinals at home versus the Washington Commanders. This game has a 49-point over-under, which is the highest of the week. They are giving up the most points per game to quarterbacks. The Washington Commanders are giving up the most points per game to the quarterback position. Also, the Washington Commanders themselves can actually score, so there is shootout potential here. Kyler Murray can get it done through the air and on the ground, so he is a must-start high-end quarterback one in this matchup. And then on the other side of the ball, another quarterback start of the week for me is Jayden Daniels of the Washington Commanders at the Arizona Cardinals. Like I said, it's a 49-point over-under, the highest of the week. I highlighted Jayden Daniels as a draft season value because of his rushing upside, and he has indeed been great for fantasy football. He's currently the quarterback 2 overall, and he has finished as a top 3 quarterback in weeks 1 and week 3. This dynamic playmaker is in a position where, he can run, he can throw. He doesn't have the best weapons, but Terry McLaurin and, kind of the combination of the other guys in that offense, they're doing enough to supply him for fantasy. So Jayden Daniels is a dynamic playmaker, and this game has shootout potential. So Jayden Daniels is a high-end quarterback one start in week 4. All right, we're going to move on to the running back position. We're going to start with, in that same game, Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders is on the road against the Arizona Cardinals. It has a high over under 49 points, like I've said for my last 2 starts of the week. It is the same game, so it is the same over under. But yeah, you have that high over under. And Brian Robinson has been really solid for fantasy so far. One of the better draft values at the running back position. He's currently the running back 15 on the season, and Austin Eckler is out for this game. So that means that Brian Robinson's workload is even more secure. It's not going to be as much of a committee. The Arizona Cardinals give up the 10th most points per game to running backs, and this projects to be a very high-scoring game. I like Brian Robinson as a running back 2 in this game. And then, shocker, we're going to go with one more player from that Washington Cardinals game. Not the Washington Cardinals, the Washington Arizona game, the Commanders Cardinals game. And that is James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals at home versus the Washington Commanders. He was the running back 10 in week 1, the running back 6 in week 2, and then he was the running back 54 in week 3. One of those things is not like the other. He had a disastrous week 3, but I do expect a bounce back performance in week 4 for James Conner. The Detroit Lions, that's a brutal matchup that James Conner had in week 3. They are only giving up 8 points per game to the running back position as a whole in fantasy football. That is the lowest in the entire NFL by 4 whole points. They are absolutely shutting down the running game. This is a much better matchup this week in week 4 against a bad Washington Commanders defense. James Conner started the week as a low to mid running back 1. My third and final running back start of the week, Zack Moss of the Cincinnati Bengals at the Carolina Panthers. This game has a 47-point over-under, the second highest of the week. Very interesting what benching Bryce Young can do for a team. Andy Dalton last week looked great. There could definitely be a lot of points scored in this game, and I want pieces of it. And one of those pieces I want is Zack Moss, who has established himself as the lead back over Chase Brown in that backfield. Zack Moss is the running back 19 on the season, and the Panthers give up the 5th most points per game to the running back position. Fire up Zack Moss as a mid running back 2 play in week 4. Those are my running back starts of the week. We're going to move on to the wide receiver position, and we're not going to target the Commanders and Cardinals matchup here, although obviously, you're starting Marvin Harrison Jr., Terry McLaurin's not a bad play either, but there's a few other guys that I really want to highlight here. So we're going to start with Stefon Diggs of the Houston Texans at home versus the Jacksonville Jags. I love CJ Stroud this week at quarterback, and you should be auto-starting Nico Collins in that wide receiver room as well. But Stefon Diggs is also a really great play at the wide receiver position this week in week 4. Stefon Diggs has been really good so far, but with fellow Texans wide receiver Tank Dell out for this game with injury, Stefon Diggs' target share becomes even more secure, and he becomes an even better play. When you have that trio of wide receivers there, there's one football, only one player can get targeted on each play. You take one of those guys out of the equation, I think that's just going to solidify the targets for Stefon Diggs just a little bit more, who's already been good for fantasy. Jacksonville gives up the 10th most points per game to the wide receiver position, and they just got lit up last week by the Buffalo Bills. I like Stefon Diggs as a mid to high wide receiver 2 play in week 4. We got another my guy on this list. So we talked about Jake Ferguson in the Thursday night game looking really solid as a my guy. Kyler Murray was my quarterback my guy. We're going to talk about my wide receiver my guy from the draft season, and that is DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks on the road against the Detroit Lions. Since a rough week 1 in a tough matchup against the Denver Broncos and superstar cornerback Patrick Surtain, DK Metcalf has put together back-to-back top 10 weeks. Detroit's pass funnel defense means Seattle should find success in the air, and Metcalf is the guy that you want in that passing game. Like I said earlier, the Detroit Lions are absolutely shutting down the position, giving up the fewest points per game to running backs, only 8 total points per game to the running back position. So if the Seahawks are going to move the ball, it's going to be through the air. I like DK Metcalf a lot this week as a low wide receiver 1 play. And then we're going to move on to the next wide receiver start of the week here, and it is a duo. Okay, I am allowed to do that. I make the rules. We're going to go with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Bucks at home versus the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles give up the 5th most points per game to wide receivers. Chris Godwin has been tremendous. He's currently the wide receiver 3 overall in all of fantasy football. So there is no reason to turn away from him now. Mike Evans had a really good week 1 where he had 2 touchdowns. Week 2 wasn't great against Detroit. And then last week in week 3, he got erased by Denver and Patrick Surtain, the stud defensive back. This is a great matchup where I think Mike Evans can bounce back here. Mike Evans is a really good player. He has disappeared at times in the past, but he's a type of player where you know that he's going to have a few disappearing acts, especially because he's a little bit touchdown dependent, but you don't want to put him on your bench when he has his big game, and this is definitely a great spot where Mike Evans could have himself a big performance. I like both of these guys as low wide receiver 1s. And you thought we were done. Oh no. We got one more bonus wide receiver start of the week, and that is going to be Jauan Jennings at home versus the New England Patriots if, okay, this is big, if Deebo Samuel is out. Okay? George Kittle is back this week, so let me paint you a picture here. Last week, Jauan Jennings had a great matchup against the Rams, and I actually made Brandon Ayuk a start of the week, but with that, I did include a little note about Jauan Jennings that he is also a pretty solid spot start, a good DFS play, and if you took me up on that advice, not so much the Brandon Ayuk part, but the Jauan Jennings part, you were rewarded because Jennings saw 12 targets, turned into 11 receptions for 175 yards and 3 touchdowns. He was the wide receiver 1 overall on the week. And obviously, that situation was only able to happen because Deebo Samuel at wide receiver and George Kittle at tight end were both out. It looks like George Kittle is going to be back, but if Deebo Samuel is out, he's questionable as of this recording, and he may or may not play. But if Deebo is out, Jauan Jennings, I still like him in this matchup. I don't think he's going to be the wide receiver 1 overall, obviously, but I think Jennings is proving to just be a solid player, and obviously when everyone is healthy, it's going to be hard for him to consistently be good, but I think he's earning targets in this offense, and yeah, he's just a solid player. Cornerback Christian Gonzalez of the Patriots should be focused on Brandon Ayuk in this matchup, which potentially leaves plenty of opportunity available for whoever is the wide receiver 2 for the 49ers this week. So Jauan Jennings, another week. If Deebo is out again, here's another week of him being a really solid spot start. And then we're going to move on to the tight end position. So I was going to talk about Cole Kmet of the Chicago Bears because I liked him a lot if Keenan Allen was out. We saw him have a big week last week, but the reports are saying that there's a pretty good chance that Keenan Allen is going to play. So if Keenan Allen is out, you can stream Cole Kmet, but if Keenan Allen plays, like it is being reported as probably going to happen, we're going to move on to some other streaming options that we're going to go over here right after you subscribe or follow wherever you are enjoying the pod. All right. First tight end start of the week. We're going to go with Dallas Goedert of the Philadelphia Eagles on the road against the Tampa Bay Bucks. Dallas Goedert is a tight end 1 on the season. That's not really saying much. The tight end position has been very gross this year. Everyone's been disappointing, and he really just had one big week in week 3. And since there's not a lot of points going around at tight end, having one big week in a 3-week sample size is really all you need to be number 1 overall. Weeks 1 and 2 weren't much for Goedert, but in week 3, with no A.J. Brown on the field at wide receiver, Dallas Goedert had 10 receptions for 170 receiving yards, which is just insane to even think about. I don't expect a repeat of that, obviously, but Devontae Smith left that game in the 4th quarter with a concussion, and he has already been ruled out for week 4. As of this recording, A.J. Brown is questionable, and he may or may not play. It's not definitive as of this recording. I wouldn't be surprised either way, so monitor the news, like I said at the beginning of the episode. Stay up to date with the injury report. But either way, we already know that Devontae Smith is out, so with one or both of them out, if both Smith and A.J. Brown are not able to go, there are no other reliable wide receivers on this roster, so Dallas Goedert is a great play in week 4, as he will be very necessary to the offense. He is actually a high tight end 1 play for me in week 4. We're going to go with a guy who had much higher expectations than Dallas Goedert and has not quite lived up to them yet. But I think he is going to have a good week this week, and that is Dalton Kincaid of the Buffalo Bills on the road against the Baltimore Ravens. So Dalton Kincaid had his best game of the season last week where he went 3 for 41 and a touchdown. So, you know, the yardage wasn't superstar stuff, but he got in the end zone, and he hadn't done much in weeks 1 and 2. So that was enough to be his best performance of the week. The Buffalo Bills rolled the Miami Dolphins and the Jacksonville Jags in week 2 and 3. And honestly, Dalton Kincaid hasn't really been needed in most of those games beyond the first or second quarter. Week 4 should be a more competitive game against the Baltimore Ravens. And that same Ravens team is giving up the most passing yards per game in the entire NFL, as well as the second most points per game to tight ends in all of fantasy. I'm expecting a breakout performance for Dalton Kincaid, who I love this week as a mid to high tight end 1 play. And then my final tight end start of the week. You know he's great in all aspects of life because of his first name, and that is Tyler Conklin of the New York Jets at home versus the Denver Broncos. Tyler Conklin only had 1 reception in each of his first 2 games, but in week 3, he had himself a nice little performance with 6 targets, turned into 5 receptions for 83 yards. This game has an over-under of only 39.5 points, but with Patrick Surtain, who's been shutting people down lately, covering Garrett Wilson on the perimeter, I expect some of the secondary options to see a potential bump in production in this game, meaning Tyler Conklin could be a solid play if you're desperate. Also, this Denver Broncos Vance Joseph defense, what we know about him is his defenses can kind of give it up to the tight end position. So there is an opportunity here, and the matchup doesn't really scare me. You can play Tyler Conklin if you don't have a solid tight end, or if you have Trey McBride or David Njoku on the roster. They have both been ruled out for week 4. So Tyler Conklin is not a bad pivot option. For me, he is a high tight end 2 play who could PPR his way to success in week 4. All right, those are my tight end starts of the week. And those are all my starts of the week. Thank you for listening. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed, make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you are taking in this pod. And yeah, if you do want video for the podcast in the future, if you're not already on the YouTube, like I said, just look up Fantasy Football Prodigy on the YouTube channel, and I'm the green and black logo. So I'll see you guys there. Good luck in week 4 with your roster decisions. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Stay hydrated. Peace.